Okay, so here's our run of the show. We're going to be together hopefully for the next 3 hours, and we really hope that you'll find it worthwhile. We really worked hard to make this agenda one that will be very informative and also interactive. I know in the world of multimedia and social media and all the rest of this here, we turn into multitaskers. That's a real challenge, really, when we're actually paying attention about some things. So we really do ask that you try to do your best to not answer all the emails that may be coming your way and flooding your inbox or viewing HBO movies or whatever on the side. What we're really hoping is that we can command your attention around this important topic throughout the next 3 hours. We're going to hear from our colleagues from NOAA, who will be giving us a very condensed version of what the national water model is all about. Then the real fun begins. We're going to hear from 6 communities that have been involved with applying the national water model in different cases. So we're calling these our use cases. And we have presenters from each of those communities essentially providing the good and sometimes the ugly that goes with the work that they've been doing. And that's going to take place from the next part of the program. And then we're going to break those out. So we're asking basically each of those presentations. We've been kind of trying to really constrain to 5 to 7 minutes to kind of give the high level overview about the use cases. And then there's a chance we're going to be breaking you out into 3 groups. And inside each of those groups, you'll have at least 2 of the members of the community's use cases. So we're going to have a dialogue back and forth. There can be a way for you to be able to dig into questions that you might have or offer observations about your own experiences here. So that will consume our efforts in the second part of the program. Then we're going to introduce some new resources that we've generated. There's actually a website we just put up, the use cases as well as other information that we can be sharing with you and also that NOAA has. And then we will hopefully bring you all together and you'll still be in there, still excited about the work we're doing. And we'll be wrapping this up. All times here, of course, are Eastern times, but be wrapping up in the end of the 3rd hour. Okay, so that's a little bit of the lay of the land. I hope I sparked interest to stay engaged. You signed up and you're here and we're thrilled. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian now to get us really off and running.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve. So as we keep mentioning, this is what we're presenting on today is wrapping up what we're calling phase 2 of our 3-phase study. So this study that we've been engaged in, we call it a CIRO study, CIROH, it's Cooperative Institute for Research Operations and Hydrology. But really the question that we've been asking is, how can NOAA's National Water Model be used to aid in community resilience-related decision-making and planning? So what we learned in what we called phase 1 is we interviewed folks engaged in resilience-related decision-making and planning across the United States. And what we learned is that 65% of the folks that we spoke to had actually never heard of the National Water Model before. But when they did learn about it, then they were really excited and they had a lot of ideas for how it could be applied and useful in their own work. But what we also learned is that most of these folks requested ways that would make this very technical hydrologic model more accessible to them, because most of them were not trained hydrologists themselves, even though they use water data very, very often. So one of these top recommendations that we heard was to create use cases that showcase how other communities have used the National Water Model in their work. So that's exactly what we did, and that's what we're going to be sharing with you today. So over the course of the past year, we've been working with stakeholders from 6 different communities across the US, shown here, to either capture how they have already been using the National Water Model independent of this study, or to work with them to create new applications of how the National Water Model could benefit their work. So I'm not going to spoil what these are about, because later on we're going to hear directly from them themselves in short presentations. And then also we're going to have breakout rooms that will allow you to more directly engage and ask more questions to them specifically. Today, what we're going to start with, and I'll pass it over shortly, is an overview of the National Water Model, because as we learned previously, we can't expect that everybody is an expert in it. And then we're going to hear from the stakeholders themselves. And really what we just want to reiterate is that our goal here today is really just to inspire folks to investigate how the National Water Model might be useful in your own work, and potentially to inspire some NOAA folks to investigate new applications of the National Water Model as well. So before I pass it over to our NOAA collaborators, I just want to note that we're really hoping that today's conversation will be kind of as engaging and back and forth as possible. So we really encourage you to use the chat. We are building in some Q&A sessions specifically. So after David and Brian are able to present, we'll have a direct Q&A session so you can actually come off mute and ask questions directly. But if you're not, but also at the same time, anytime during the presentation, please feel free to put whatever questions come up directly in the chat. If we're able to respond to them easily in the chat, we will. Otherwise, we'll call on you during the Q&A to ask them directly. Yeah, and hopefully too, we'll be sharing a list of resources at the end of this as well. So if you're not quickly capturing as much of this information, we'll make a lot of this publicly available as well. So with
Christian,
that,
just a quick housekeeping note for the folks here. There was a bit of a glitch with some of you in the registered here, where you come up as a clone of Kieran Hederman, who has helped to orchestrate all together. So if you see that your name is not your name, please make the edits as you can. I'm seeing 4 Kierans right now, so it would be great so we know just who you are. Okay, and with that, Christian, back to you.
Sure, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so first, we're going to pass it over to our colleagues, Brian Cosgrove, who is the Technical Director for the National Water Model at NOAA's National Weather Service, and David Valley, who's the Director of Service Innovation and Partnership Division for NOAA's Office of Water Prediction. So with that, I will stop sharing so that David and Brian, you're able to share your own screens, and over to you.
Okay, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. This is David Valley. I'm the Director of the Service Innovation and Partnership Division. Kristen, I cannot share at the moment. Oh, there we go. Okay, now we have it flipped over. All right. Fingers crossed this works. And then we will have Brian Cosgrove, my friend and colleague in our Analysis and Prediction Division, who's been overseeing the technical development of the National Water Model, kick things off. He's going to talk about the overview of the model briefly, what its current capabilities are, where we're going with it, which is going to represent a pretty monumental change in the model, but it's tremendously exciting for us on the forecast side of the house. And then I'll talk about some of the services that we're visualizing today on our various browser flood inundation services that we're just starting now to roll out. Kind of a tag team effort here. So Brian, show, it is all yours, sir.
All right, thank you very much, David. So as David mentioned, I'm a technical director of the National Water Model. I'm stationed up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and basically I work with the team to bring new versions of the water model from research into operations. What I'm going to be covering for the next just 10 minutes or so is a brief overview, like David said, of where we are right now with the water model, what it is, what it's not, and sort of where we're going with the model itself before transitioning over to David's talk. So it's a team effort, both from the Office of Water Prediction and our development and research partners. And we'll kind of get into now what the water model is. So one way to think about the National Water Model is as a water counterpart to some of the weather models that we may be more familiar with, perhaps. So for decades, we've had national and global weather models that have been upgraded through various versions, but only very recently have we had a seamless, consistent national water model. This is since 2016 when we put National Water Model into operations. And what this model does is it provides both complementary and first-time hydrologic guidance to all variety of end users. So what I mean by that is that there are many excellent and skillful sources of information right now besides the National Water Model. And what we can do by overlaying this national guidance is to reinforce and kind of add to some of the guidance that we may be using already where it's available. And on top of that, then there are many areas where we haven't had any guidance before, but now where we can sort of, for the first time, provide that complementary source of information from the National Water Model. And getting into this a bit more with version 3. So basically, the implication there is that we upgrade through different versions of the model. And so with version 3 of the model that we just put in last year, we now have, for the first time, production of total water level guidance. And that is basically, you'll see in a couple slides, it's basically combining the ocean storm surges and tides with the freshwater influence to create a more accurate depiction of that water level along the coast. But So that's our big upgrade for version 3, and we'll get into that a little bit. Off to the upper right there, I'll just mention we have around 3,600 points from the river forecast centers of very valuable information. As you drill down and zoom in a bit, you encounter gaps in our knowledge, kind of spatial gaps where we haven't had much guidance, say, over this, especially the smaller rivers and streams, about what's going on there. And so that's what we have with the national water models, being able to fill in those gaps in knowledge. Down in the bottom left, you can see we cover the CONUS, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Alaska, and Hawaii. Next slide. So here's an illustration of how we're filling in those gaps in coverage. This is the North Carolina, South Carolina border in the bottom right there. That's what that horizontal line is. You can see I've called out Charlotte, North Carolina there. And then we have those 3 circles which represent River Forecast Center locations of forecasts. That's where they're providing official river forecast centers through the AHAP system. And if we were, say, interested in different regions, say headwater points away from those small creeks, rivers, which could be sensitive infrastructure or roads or other areas of concern, we may have difficulty finding that real-time forecast coverage. What we can do is then overlay the National Water Model guidance, this automated 24/7 guidance. And I'll say there's no forecaster in loop with this. It's just an automated water model. We would end up with this blue network, this very dense network or web of streams that are represented within the National Water Model. And that's the area of coverage that we can get, where we could get stream flow forecast from the model. Next slide. We output more than just stream flow. Beyond that, we output soil moisture, evapotranspiration, surface temperature, snowpack, a variety of other land surface fields and forcing fields. So it's a lot beyond just stream flow. It really characterizes the whole hydrologic cycle. And in the upper right there, we support the production of inundation, flood inundation mapping, basically the coverage of the land surface with water that's kind of pooling or flowing over the surface that has risen out of it, the riverbanks. David will get much more into this, but I'll just call it out here as one of the downstream applications that the water model supports through its production of stream flow data, which then can go into the calculation of inundation maps. Next slide. All right, so what's under the hood of the National Water Model? What kind of makes this work? What allows us to compute all these different variables? If we start in the top row of those boxes there's 3 vital components. The first in the upper left is the forcing data. So that's the weather data or the meteorological data that we read into the model to push the model along. So we don't produce our own weather data. What we do is we read in external data from weather models, from observed data sets like radar data sets or rainfall gauge data sets. We read that in, ingest it into the model, and then that enters into our land surface component. The rain then infiltrates down through the surface or runs off over the surface. It can build up in snowpack or produce snowmelt, all based on the weather conditions. Another vital component of the model is the depiction of streams. Basically, how are all the rivers and streams connected within the model? What does it see the river network as? And that's what the top middle box is. We are drawing on the USGS National Hydrography Dataset Plus version 2. It's sort of just kind of a static conception of how the rivers connect across the country, and that's what we use. And then in the upper right is just something to call out. We partner with and draw heavily upon USGS observations, and we read those into the model, into our analysis, and are correct. We actually use those to correct or get our model back on track through data assimilation techniques or estimates of stream flow. All of this feeds through different physical elements, the land surface and over the surface, et cetera, through reservoirs and conceptual groundwater modules. That pushes through, determines the stream flow into the channels, which then gets routed down to the ocean. Let's see, did I see a question pop up by chance?
Yeah, we do have
I took care of the one for Puerto Rico, Brian.
Okay.
There was one about Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands. That's yes.
Okay.
And there's one about frozen ground if you want to address that.
Okay. Let's see. So I'll just ask a housekeeping question. Is it okay if I would you guys like me to answer kind of in real time or save to the end?
We do have time allocated at the end of your presentation. Really, as long as we just wrap up this session by 12:45, either approach works.
Okay. Okay, we'll save to the end. I'll just kind of speed through the slides and then we'll save time for Q&A then. Okay. Okay, next slide, David. So we've talked a bit about what the water model is, what it covers across the country. We've talked about what it produces for output fields, and also we kind of took a peek under the hood and saw the different modules within it. So this slide looks a bit complicated, but this is how everything's connected, like how it runs in real time. Again, there's no forecaster in the loop. We can't make manual changes to the forecasts. This thing is just running in basically a hermetically sealed environment, 24/7, producing both analyses every hour, short range forecast out to 18 hours in length. That's produced every hour. We have a 10-day forecast, which is produced every 6 hours during the day. So 4 times a day it's updated. And that's actually a 6-member ensemble using different types of forcing data. And then we have a long range forecast out to 30 days, and that's produced 4 times a day as well. That's also a 4-member ensemble. And so what we have in that right then, so that was all CONUS configurations. Off to the right, we have Hawaii and Puerto Rico along with Alaska. They differ a little bit in terms of their forecast lengths from the CONUS, but it's the same basic thing in terms of an hourly analysis and then a short range forecast. And then in the case of Alaska, at least, also a medium range forecast. The last thing I'll mention is in the bottom right, we have a little asterisk or star symbol there. That's our brand new coastal total water level configuration. Anytime you see a star symbol next to the different forecast configurations here, that's accompanying total water level forecast as well. Next slide. So we output a ton of data, as you can imagine, greater than 1 terabyte a day. And we disseminate that over the NOMADS data dissemination system, which is operationalized or supported operationally by the National Weather Service. We also produce a bunch of retrospective data, so historical analysis data. For CONUS, for example, we have a 44-year run. We also have multi-year runs for Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. All this adds up to greater than 100 terabytes. And luckily, we have some good partnerships with the big data providers through the NOAA Open Data Dissemination Initiative that is making possible the public dissemination of these historical data sets. And lately with version 3 of the model, what we've really concentrated on is, again, putting in that new total water level capability. That was actually at some congressional direction that we received. We're also supporting flood inundation maps or FIM maps, like I mentioned before. And then we also have other improvements down towards the bottom. We'll see 4 bullets: expansion to South Central Alaska, use of new forcing data sets such as the National Blend of Models and multi-radar or multi-sensor data. So we're always trying to improve the forcing with each version because that then improves our streamflow forecasts, and then implementation of some improved physics as well. So the total water level component, how does that operate? In terms of the spatial coverage, we cover CONUS, the continental United States, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And what we're doing is connecting a coastal estuary model, which is the circle in the middle. We're basically using as an intermediary or as the glue between the national water model, which is providing inland kind of freshwater forecasts, and then we have ocean models that we read in as boundary conditions. And in the middle, where they meet up, is this new water model coastal estuary model, or it's based on the schism framework. We read in forcing data. We read in, again, National Water Model streamflow data. We read in ocean water level data from the STOBS and PSURGE models. All of those combine in the middle again and give us that good estimate of the water level elevation, including all those factors. Next slide. We've expanded up to Alaska. We work very closely with the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center to customize the set of forcing data we're using up there, as well as the models. So for example, we needed an enhanced snow or glacier model up there to represent the cold processes. We're complementing the AHAPS forecast points that you see on the left there with around 390,000 stream reaches that you see in the bottom right. And in terms of the coverage, you can see it in the yellow map at the middle right there on the side of the slide. That's where we're covering right now for Alaska. Next slide. With each version of the model, we're very careful to assess the skill of the model and also make sure that we are doing better than the previous version of the model before we put the new model in. This is sort of at the continental scale. There'll always be areas that get better, unfortunately always areas that get a bit worse, because as you put in physics changes and forcing changes, you do get local impacts kind of up and down. But on the whole, what we want to see on average is sort of a march towards higher and higher overall skill. And we see that in the graphs below. This is a distribution. The bar charts at left there are indicating the absolute peak bias, or the difference between the water models kind of during an event, the peak and the observed peak. We would love to see everything shift towards the left because it's a bit small to see. But that's where the smallest differences will be at basically zero. Ideally, we'd want that first bar to have all of, to be the tallest and have all of the sites in it. That would mean zero bias. You can see that in the beginning on the left, we were kind of a bit mixed, and we had 34% of our sites having peak bias less than 40%. As we've gone through upgrades, we're now up to more and more of our sites having a peak bias less than that threshold. Again, the distribution shifting towards the left in the direction we want. We can break it down into river forecast centers on the right there. And just basically to summarize this plot, in these pairs, we would want the rightmost of each pair of boxes to be lower than the left element. On the left is the old version of the model. On the right of the pair is the new version. We want lower peak bias, so we want the right box to be lower each time. And we see that is the case at or below the old version of the model. So the peak bias is improving across the domain. Next slide. And I'll say that peak bias is important because that really gives us insight into how the flood inundation maps will be performing, those that ingest National Water Model streamflow data. We also verify total water level data. Here's just an example from Hurricane Idalia. The plot in the bottom left there, the important things to note is the dash line where we have the observed crest of water level was about 7 feet. And then what we want to see is the thing to know about all the lines in that graph there. You can basically conceive of them as different permutations of water model runs, different things that we output when we run. So we want to bracket that dash line, and we do bracket it. We have a couple of runs that are indicating water levels a bit lower than that. We have a couple of runs that are indicating water levels above that. So at least we have that envelope from the water model bracketing what kind of what turned out there. The two small plots there in the bottom right, they're showing cycle-to-cycle variability of the water model. You can see it especially in the bottom right there, where we have several traces that are sort of ranging from pretty low to pretty high in that small graph. And that is coming from differences in our forcing data as we read in different cycles of ocean model data, P-search data to be specific. That forecast is changing, which then influences the water model's total water level forecast. And you get those differences cycle to cycle from that boundary condition. Next slide. So looking ahead here and finishing up, we're moving from version 3 of the model now over in 2026 to a brand new version 4 of the water model. I'll mention we do have a stopover in version 3.1 next year in 2025, but the reason I'm highlighting 26 is that this is a completely new framework that we'll be using underneath the National Water Model. So we're switching to something called the Next Generation Water Resources Modeling Framework. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we'll just call it Next Gen for short. You can think of that as sort of how everything's held together within the umbrella of the National Water Model, how all the pieces are connected, all of the different models are linked to form together the operational National Water Model. Right now, we use one set of physics across the whole country. And what we're doing by 2026 is to begin to break up the country into different catchments or basins over which you could actually run different combinations of physics. So no longer is it the same land surface model everywhere, but you could have several different permutations, different snow models and land surface models, infiltration models, evaporation, that could vary by basin to hopefully more accurately capture the dominant physical processes over each area. It's going to help with our forecast accuracy as we're able to tailor the physics to specific regions, help with our computational efficiency as we're able to run lightweight packages where possible. And then model capability will also increase in terms of ensemble capability, where we can run different physics permutations. Next slide. Oh, and right over to you, David. So that was my last slide.
All right. Christian, for logistical purposes, Zoom has been playing games with me. I've been trying to answer some of the questions, but it's hopping me back and forth between direct messaging and all.
Okay.
So, and I'm seeing that now, and I'm fearing that all the good stuff I'm putting in there isn't going to be seen by everyone.
Okay.
So I'll get through my slides, and then let's go back through the Q&A, because I was trying to do my best, and then I realized it started changing me as messages came into individual people.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so yeah, let's do your slides and then we can, we'll coordinate with
Okay. Yeah, which wasn't my intent, but that's okay. And Brian, if you would just scope those questions so you're ready to answer some of them. There's a good one there about drainage tiles, etc. So just thumb your way through them. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about what we're doing with all of this great stuff coming out of the National Water Model. We've been at the science of developing forecasts of water on the ground, the inundation extent, since back in 2017 with one of our summer institutes. And of course, Harvey comes along and sets the world on fire. And that really gave us both congressional impetus and forecast impetus to throw our resources behind the evolution of these services, which is where we are now, where we're actually delivering our first couple of flood inundation extent forecast services to the nation, to 10% of the nation, as part of the beginning of what will be a 4-year rollout across our nation. So I want to give you a little sense of what that's looking like. Currently, as of today, the National Water Model produces a lot of streamflow information. And what we do is we develop visualizations of this data. There's a whole subset of information that's out there already that's running across the entire nation. And I'll show you a subset of those here in a moment. But specifically for the flood inundation predictions, that we are doing as part of a 4-year rollout because of the amount of training we have to do with our field offices. Number one, to get our folks trained up on how we do this, the science behind it, the methodology, and the services themselves, so that then they can help train their partners and constituents in their areas, like emergency managers, floodplain managers, so on and so forth. So we're doing this as a 4-year rollout. Phase 1 is underway, where we are delivering the combination of water model output, as well as these new flood inundation forecasts. And it's only extent right now, it's not depth. We're still a little bit of ways from being able to do that. But we are putting out forecasts out to 5 days of the extent of where that water will be on the ground, based off of our river center forecasts within this 10% area, the green shaded areas, as well as driven by the National Water Model. So this is phase 1 of our rollout. By the end of this coming September, we will expand these services publicly to include the areas in blue. It'll be the first time that we'll do an Oconus area. We will be delivering these services to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. For them, because of the water model configuration, it'll be a 48-hour forecast driven solely by the National Water Model. But in the remainder of the United States, we're going to bring in the Pacific Northwest, and we're going to bridge that gap between Texas and the Mid-Atlantic. Now, the reason why we did Texas and the Mid-Atlantic first is really just to get an early win. We had spent 4 years over 2 different efforts putting these new inundation services, as they were prototyping this capability, in the hands of our emergency managers by doing event simulations. In Texas, they reran Harvey and the Waverly floods up in the Hill Country. For me, when I was running the Northeast River Forecast Center, we actually reran the Irene floods of 2011 through the Schoharie Valley of New York, and we also did the state of Rhode Island for the devastating floods in March of 2010. So there, where we're really looking to combine parties that we'd already exposed to these services in the field offices that had been involved, excuse me, in conducting these tabletop exercises. So we started, with what we hope would be an early win, and it certainly worked out that way. Our next group of locations, forecast areas that we're moving into, were developed based on a combination of social vulnerability, flood frequency, and flood impacts over the last decade. So this will be phase 2. The inundation services will expand from just eastern Texas and part of the Mid-Atlantic to now encompass over 30% of the U.S. population, bringing on board Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. At 60%, we will reach this milestone by the end of September of 2025. We will continue the expansion down the west coast of the United States. We will bring in that portion of Alaska as Brian described, that currently is running over Alaska, Cook's Inlet, Copper River Basin, and so on. We'll bring on board Hawaii as well and continue the expansion over the United States. And then by the end of September of 2026, our experimental inundation services will be running across the entire United States. So that's our 4-year rollout. Again, the big impetus behind why 4 years, I'm overseeing the training of the entire workforce of the National Weather Service to be able to learn how these services are derived, and most importantly, to speak to our partners about what these services are saying to help inform their decisions. And the key piece behind all of this is indeed the National Water Model, because it provides the ability to provide streamflow forecasts across 3.4 million river miles across the nation, parts of Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. But it also allows us the opportunity to translate the river center forecast at those 3,600 locations. And allowing the water model to do the routing of that water, it allows us to then take those river forecasts at these 3,600 points and map about 110 miles of potential inundation downstream of those locations. And we do this technically under the hood by transforming digital elevation modeling provided by the USGS and marrying that data set to their delineation of the rivers and streams and water bodies across the nation. That data set is called the National Hydrographic Data Set High Resolution, or NHD+. By marrying these two together, we create what we call a hydrofabric. And then from that, we create a relative elevation model where we take the digital elevation model and translate it to a relative elevation model where the stream is your center point, and each grid cell is given an elevation above the water surface to the stream to which it drains. We're able to then synthetically derive properties such as the relationship of flow passing a grid cell to its elevation above ground level. We call that translation the rating curve, where we have actual gauges, and we currently incorporate over 8,000 streamflow gauges in real time across the nation. The vast majority of those are provided by the USGS, and the gauges that we use have to provide stream flow. If there are gauges out there, I know there are many that are only stage only. We can't use those right now because we are forecasting the volume and transforming that into a stage and a surface water elevation above ground. So stage only gauges right now we cannot incorporate, but we're looking at techniques we can use as we evolve the water model to bring those gauges in too. So by doing this, we're able to translate a river center forecast or a water model flow forecast into a map like you see here in the lower right, a translation of where that water will be on the ground over the next 5 days. So think about this. For those who live in communities where you have river gauges, where we have weather service forecast points, or if not a forecast, we at least have translated that gauge data into action, minor, moderate, and major flood elevations. For decades, we've built our warning program on the deterministic forecasts and these impact statements that describe impacts based on past flood history. What we're doing, in essence, is transforming this kind of information into an actual visualization of where that water will be on the ground at peak. That's the current suite of services we provide. What you're seeing here is an example of this actual river forecast when Ida was coming across Southeast Connecticut, and actually looking at its translation to an extent of inundation at the time of peak, what we call max extent. You're also seeing two other river systems that the Northeast River Forecast Center was providing forecasts for, one being the Shetucket, the second being the Quinnebog, and these all become the Thames when you get downstream of Norwich. So you can see how by leveraging the official river forecast, letting the water model do the routing, we're able to create a set of services that we call River Center Forecast Informed Inundation Extent, or RFC-FIM for short. But when you add the National Water Model, this is where the value increases dramatically, because now we're able to translate those flows coming from the water model guidance into an extent of inundation over not only the larger rivers, where we may have forecasts, but now on all the small rivers and streams in the region. And the power behind this is that we're not just delivering this as a map on a website, but we're delivering the actual arrest service, which allows our partners the capability to bring these services directly into their own architecture in their emergency operations center, overlay all of the critical infrastructure, and be making informed decisions on where there could be road closures, inundation of municipal buildings, shopping plazas, nursing homes, etc. So that's the essence of what we're doing. And we're in our first year of delivering these services experimentally to 10% of the US population, Texas in the Mid-Atlantic. So we currently deliver 3 services. We leverage the National Water Model for 2 of them, one of which is the hourly analysis that Brian described. It's an hourly analysis of stream flow, leveraging the 8,000 stream gauges in real time. And what we do with that is we look at those flows across the nation, and where they have exceeded a high water threshold that we use to trigger the inundation services, it's going to produce inundation over the landscape, where the extent of that water should be at that hour of that stream flow analysis. And then we use the National Water Model's 10-day forecast. We map the inundation extent over the first 5 days, where we analyze what's the peak flow in any river reach across the nation. Has it exceeded that high flow threshold? And then we map the inundation above that threshold. And that's a 5-day prediction. And then we also leverage the official River Center forecast over the next 5 days, where there too, we're able to then map the inundation extent based on the peak. There's a whole host of non-inundation related water model guidance that's out there on our web services, where you can look at the peak flow arrival time, the time to get back within bank, or what we call time to return threshold. We have some rapid onset flooding where we're looking at watersheds or river reaches that are going to double their flow over the next 6 to 12 hours. And again, all these services are GIS, so you can ingest them in your own architecture. 2 websites where you can get at them for the National Water Model Services and the inundation. It's at viewerweatherwater.gov/water. The new replacement to AHAPS, our Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service, is now the National Water Prediction Service. That's at water.noaa.gov. Now we have the flood inundation services are there, but we don't have many of the other stream flow visualizations in the water model currently, because that website is geared more toward the warning and the execution around the gauges. But both will give you access to all the inundation services. So if we look at our national viewer, the weather services viewer at viewer.weather.noaa.gov. My apologies for the extra HTTPS up there. I just caught that. You'll see that the flood inundation maps have their own tab. And if you turn on the coverage domain, you'll see that red outline indicating where those inundation services are being delivered publicly at the current time. And then down below, under River Observations and Forecasts, you'll see a National Water Model tab. And here you can see output from the analysis, from the medium range forecast run, which is the 10-day forecast forced by the Global Forecast System, rainfall, temperatures, and other atmospheric variables, and the short range version, which for the United States is based off the high-risk rapid refresh high-resolution model, and it's an 18-hour forecast. But under short range, you will also see the Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Island stream flow information, which is a 48-hour forecast available 2 times daily. This is one example from the recent flooding we had in the Gulf Coast region. Here you're looking at a high water probability. So that threshold where we're trying to leverage the National Water Model flows to say, hey, we might begin to get flooding around this flow value. You're looking at a probability based on the operational run of the Global Forecast System in the last 5 runs, where it says an accumulated probability. What's the probability of exceeding that threshold? And you see the different stream reaches light up. And as you zoom in, you'll see more and more of them. That's one example of some of the visualizations off the water model. We also, during flash flood cases, point people to the rapid onset flooding probability. Here, what we're looking at is over those last 5 or 6 runs, how many instances of stream flows doubling over these particular watersheds are we seeing? What's the probability based on those last 5 or 6 runs? And here, the ones in blue, you're seeing 76 to 100% likelihood of getting what we would call rapid onset flooding, or an indicator for potential flash flooding. If you go to water.noaa.gov, here is our new National Water Prediction Service, where we have a whole host of information. This looks very similar to the legacy Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service. You can zoom in, you can click on one of these gauge icons. The current colors indicate the forecast over the next 3 days. You can click on National Water Model and see a couple of the different features that we have there, but also the flood inundation. So for example, the beauty behind this site is if you're interested in a gauged location, you can click on that location and also see the inundation beside it. You can zoom in, toggle on the flood inundation service, and then look at the actual river forecast. If it's at a forecasted location, that's driving that inundation prediction. If it's location where there's a gauge, but there isn't an official river forecast coming from the Weather Service, well, that's no problem. Now you can actually look at the various runs of the National Water Model. You can see the medium range run, you can see the short range guidance, and you can even toggle on the official forecaster for the location where we have that. So it gives you a really nice, easy way to get at a lot of the stream flow information in real time, in advance of and through the life cycle of a flood event. So I just wanted to give you at least a little bit of a snapshot of how we're leveraging the National Water Model to produce visualizations to support real-time decision-making and highlight the new inundation services that we've just begun to roll out across the nation. So, Kristen, with the time we have left, why don't we try to hop down some of the questions?
Yeah, so actually we are a few minutes over on this session. So I was thinking we could hit maybe one or two key questions. And I am wondering if you were able to respond publicly to some of those questions in the chat as we continue on to the next sessions, if you're able to kind of continue that. And then I'll kind of let everybody know as well. We are going to share a link at the end of this so we can aggregate any questions. So if they aren't able to be answered now, we will provide a venue. So
Sure.
Circulated back to you both. So that way we can answer any questions. But I think you've been up to date on this. If there are any questions that stood out to you, if we could just do two quick responses briefly before we move on to our next session.
Yeah, let's while we've got Brian here, I want to get one or two of the technical ones out of the way. Brian, there was one there about drainage tiles. We know that that's a big forecast challenge.
Okay.
In the upper Midwest. We want to hit that one.
I'll be super quick here. So, yeah, we recognize drainage tiles are a very important thing to represent. Right now, they are not captured at all in the National Water Model. So that is a physical process, if you will, that we are working on getting a representation for in the future, especially with the next gen framework that will allow us to tailor the physical components, the formulations to different areas. So that is something we want to include. It's not included yet. And SC would see is info available for all rivers, Puerto Rico and USVI. So anything that's contained in the National Hydrography data set, for example, those are the streams that we would provide information for. And
I saw a question too about the rainfall going into the model. So for the medium range run, we're using the GFS and a time lagged ensemble of it. So it's the current run, and Brian, I think it's the last 5, so 6 in total.
Yeah, that's the current one plus the 5 before that.
Okay. So that rainfall is a 10-day forecast. We're taking the full 10 days of QPF for each of those and enforcing the water model with that. For the short range run, the 48-hour one for Puerto Rico and for Hawaii, that's using a different atmospheric model. That's why it's only twice a day and only goes out 48 hours, but it is the full 48 hours. And the short range run for the United States, which leverages the high-risk rapid refresh numerical model, HRRR, that is a full 18 hours of QPF. When you're looking at the river center inundation, the river center QPFs do vary. Some utilize 3 days, some even go out to 5 or 7 days. It is a little bit more variable there. So, Kristen, we can take a stab at making sure that the everyone button is there, so we can answer a couple more of the questions.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So I just want to thank you both, David and Brian, both for your continued support of this whole project and for being here today and answering questions. Yeah, it would be great if you could respond to as many of those questions publicly, because I think everybody would benefit from hearing those answers in the chat as possible. And then to the audience members, if your question wasn't answered or you wanted to follow up, we'll providing several opportunities to continue this discussion later. But with that, if you wouldn't mind just stop sharing your screen right now, we are going to.
Certainly.
Perfect, thank you. We are now going to hear short presentations from our 6 different groups of stakeholders that we have worked with over the past year to either capture their existing experiences using the National Water Model or their brand new ones. I'm just going to remind all of our speakers, we do have a 7-minute cap on each of these presentations. So we're going to have my colleague Maria give you a little 2-minute warning as a direct message. And then at 7 minutes, we are going to be cutting the screen sharing just so we make sure we stay on schedule, but we will have the breakout room opportunity following our Q&A session. So if you don't feel like you can get to every nitty-gritty detail and highlight of your work, there will be another opportunity to share in more detail. And as I mentioned, we are going to provide several contact opportunities later. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Todd Maniz from Vermont. So Todd, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and then also I'm just going to do a brief introduction like that. So each speaker, if you wouldn't mind also just giving a tiny little bit more information about yourself as well. So without further ado, over to you, Todd.
Okay, now I think, do you have that slide up?
Either you can share yourself or Kieran should have a copy of everyone's slides if you would like him to share instead. Oh, there you go. That's great.
You got that up?
Yep.
Okay. Can you see your cursor here? I'm on my main screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Can you see it? No, you can't see this because you're looking at the other screen. Let me,
Yeah, we can just see your PowerPoint deck.
right. So I'm just going to move the screen and then, sorry about that.
I think somebody's not muted that's typing right now. If you're typing, maybe check your mute.
Come on. Well, sorry, folks. I'll just go with this and you're seeing these slides over here.
We aren't anymore. If you could share again.
Oh, okay. Some people are hard to train, you know.
or Kieran, if you have them ready, we could do it that way as well.
Kieran, if you're ready and you can do that faster than me, go ahead. All right. I'm going back. Is that up?
Yes, we can
Good.
see.
Okay. So, sorry, I got to move this over. Good. Now, thanks for the opportunity to be here to the NWM team. And come on. Oh boy, I'm accustomed to Teams, not Zoom. All right, I've already had that slide up. So, Todd Manise, one of the river management engineers in Vermont, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about planning for flood resilience and public safety. Vermont's Rivers program is responsible for protecting and restoring natural river and floodplain processes to enhance water quality, ecological health, and flood resilience for public safety. River resource protection is achieved through a combination of permitting, regulatory, and non-regulatory technical assistance, assessment, planning, education, and outreach. This is the first of slides in Northfield, Vermont, after Irene. This is the Dog River Park landscaping plan. So this is a social for the town, economic and environmental win-win-win. The use case goal to introduce the national floodwater model to help address flood amnesia in Vermont by providing communities flood and stream information at a scale relevant to small municipalities. What is flood amnesia? A lot of people have forgotten. In the last 14 years in this job, there have been 12 large floods in the state. Town of Northfield, they didn't forget about it. They worked 70 years, got this done, and I've been there. Beautiful park. If you forget about it, you're impacting work in Vermont. What did we do to it? What did we achieve the goal? Introduce the National Water Model last year in 2023 Municipal Day. What were the reactions from the people in the communities? Other stakeholders, they were jazzed. What's useful about the NWN? Real-time, year-round forecasting helps combat flood amnesia by allowing communities to understand the waterways they live along all year long, not just in the worst-case scenario. Predictive flood inundation mapping allows emergency responders to estimate the impacts of storms before they happen. Comprehensive coverage. Anyone can zoom in and immediately locate and explore streams in their area. More easily than with a static map. We'll have another presentation this municipal day, November 1st this year. Here's an aerial photo of the park now. This hasn't been fully planted. I've been there since it's fully planted. It's really beautiful. What was challenging? there have been water professionals in Vermont that say, oh, the national water model isn't useful. Oh, it's redundant with national weather forecasts. Oh, NWM will replace the National Weather Service forecast. So we've got to educate and familiarize people with the national water model, not just here across the United States. It will augment National Weather Service. It will help people better understand and address actions. Here's a flood from 2023. The 7 homes are gone. This is the aerial photo, shows restored floodplain lowered water elevations from 3.5 deep in some of these homes to only 1 foot deep. NWM can predict floods 10 days, 5, 1 day out, giving people time to prepare. 2023, David Valley had some Vermont flood forecast in the model from the 2023 flood last June. And now the residents in this neighborhood can decide whether to evacuate their homes, move things off the 2nd floor, or take other actions. And again, people were surprised last year. This is what I did on Friday. This gauge is the closest to my house on the Ottaquechee River. This was, I don't know, 4 or 5 clicks and maybe 2 minutes. The map, observed, and forecast. Of course, there's nothing forecast because we're in a dry period right now. 2 more slides here. So what do we recommend? Get involved, everybody. Citizens, towns, cities, counties, regional planning commissions, state, non-governmental organizations. You saw on the map that David Valley had, Bennington and Windham counties. They prepared these 1-page flyers with the NWM team last year, and they've already been distributed. Again, questions later, please. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Todd. So as we mentioned, we're going to save all of the questions after these 6 short presentations for the very end. But if you do have a question in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, but just also including the name of the speaker that it's for. And then we should be able to address those either in the Q&A or immediately following this in the breakout rooms. So without further ado, we're going to switch over to our next presenter, which is Joel Nipper from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. And if you also wouldn't mind giving yourself a brief presentation as well, or I guess we have James Scanlon instead. Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to say, first things first, it's not Joel Nipper, as it turns out. It's me. Joel's a very important part of this project. Make no mistake about that. I work with the flood mitigation and planning technology team at Mecklenburg County. So we're responsible for monitoring the major system floodplain or the FEMA floodplain. Joel is I think he's a water scientist, statistician, hydrologist by trade. So we really needed a ringer, and we cheated and brought him into our discussions with the national water model. Hope you can see my screen. So just quickly, acknowledgements. I didn't do this alone with just Joel. There's a team at Mecklenburg County I work with that oversees our flood monitoring system. And I appreciate Global Resilience Institute and Dr. Rob and everybody. Sorry if I missed anybody, but we really appreciate the opportunity to be brought into this discussion with folks at the National Water Center. This is very invaluable information. It kind of got our interest sparked and seeing how we could utilize this for flood forecasting, and we're excited about where the directions of things are going. So just to give you a quick overview about Mecklenburg County, it's a mostly urban county with some rural characteristics. As you can see, it's not near the ocean and it's not in the mountains. It's somewhere in between. It's in the Piedmont of North Carolina, mostly clay soils. And that smaller inset picture is meant to indicate that the watersheds are kind of small and they're prone to flash flooding. And as a community, we're trying to deal with the challenges of being a rapidly urbanizing environment while that was built prior to flood maps, before they knew the risks, or the risks weren't as pronounced as they are now due to development, managing stormwater, those sorts of things. So we have a lot of intelligence on our flood-prone buildings and and roads, and we monitor them and we study them in great details. I'll go over here in a second. So first of all, flood monitoring is handled by our flood information notification system. It's called FINS. It's a very dense network of gauges. We have 72 USGS rain gauges and 52 USGS stage gauges, as well as 3 lake gauges. That's all operated and maintained by the USGS, but we utilize the data. And then we have our own network that we maintain here at Mecklenburg County. It's called our low-cost sensors network. It was initially brought to us through a partnership with DHS Science and Technology Directorate to test this experimental technology in the field. And so we've operationalized it now. The experiment's over. It's good information and it's usable equipment. So we operate and maintain our own network to supplement the USGS network. And we also have cameras. Those can be for seeing things as they unfold during a flood event. Another aspect is our floodplain mapping program. We have detailed flood maps for all of our what we consider large or major system drainage areas. Those are 1 square mile or above. So that's 114 reaches, 370 plus linear miles. We're modeling 8 events all the way from the 2-year to the 500-year, plus a future conditions model that we use for regulatory purposes. We have a lot of non-regulatory products that are produced along with the regulatory flood maps, and they include our probabilistic flood data. Those are mainly in the form of rasters like water surface elevations, depths, and percent annual chance grids. And then all of this information kind of informs our flood mitigation program. We, are in a position where we have to kind of right the wrongs of the past and mitigate properties that are at high risk. This started out using a lot of FEMA grants and federal grants and has evolved over time to be locally funded and managed with local money where grants aren't necessarily widely available or we don't make the cut sort of thing, but we still have a priority to reduce our risk. So this was all operationalized in a risk assessment risk reduction plan. This is all done with at the building level. So each structure that's flood prone is enriched with information, mostly survey information, some that's computer generated or an estimate, but it determines the level of risk and assigns it points, and it also determines specific flood mitigation strategies that are appropriate for each of these structures. So we have kind of our goal over the next coming decades is to eliminate roughly 500 more structures in some way or another. We either acquire them and demolish them or implement a in-place mitigation measure. And so anyway, this brings us to our flood inundation map. So we've got those 3 components: the monitoring data, the mapping data, and the mitigation data. That formula kind of gives us this ability to do flood inundation maps with impact assessment. So it's near real time. It's not necessarily forecasted, but the information from the field is coming in real time, and then it's being ingested into mapping routines that can take the existing detailed flood models and based upon the probability, it can assign like an extent, and then it can derive water surface elevations. And then you can take assets like buildings or roads and compare the elevations of those with the elevations of the floods that are occurring at that moment. And it's particularly useful just after the fact. You can do a maximum inundation for all areas at the same time and determine how many buildings are impacted. So that allows us to kind of really have a very precise response. We tend to visit the properties that have had the most impact in short order and just validate and make sure that residents' needs are being met and that their mitigation options are made aware of those. So that flood inundation mapping, it started in about 3.5 years ago. It was kind of the first time we were able to use it. We had a large rain event in November of 2020, and so that the project was not complete, but it was in progress, and we were far enough along we could utilize the data. And so it's been operationalized fully internally now, and we use it. We're constantly running analysis on real-time flood assessment, whether it's happening or not. There's something running in the background, and then we have the ability to do these detailed runs right after the fact. So with all that said, we do want to make some enhancements. So we want to be able to give more early warnings. So we're, first of all, focusing on our displays and our notifications. We're focusing on really high risk crossings and places that need to be evacuated, and try to give information before they flood. That's kind of like our alerts system, just an expansion upon that and providing a visible aspect to that. And then I've circled here flood forecasting. That's where we want to do some modeling or machine learning, some approach that will take rainfall, stage, and soil moisture, and kind of understand those dynamics with historic data, and then develop a forecasted stage that we can plug into our mapping routines. And then there's some other things that will help our validation and our future products in the future, like 2D floodplain mapping will probably give us more resolution than our current mapping, which is 1D. But that's in the future. That's just kind of in the early stages of all those things. So as far as the flood forecasting, I'll focus on that. We do have a need to provide this intelligence to potential hotspots, so we can tell emergency management where to stage resources and close down roads and take other proactive measures. The Emergency Operations Center is an obvious use for it, but since we're a flash flood community, we're trying to thread that needle of getting information that's rapidly developing and turning it around and providing that intelligence, just still ahead of time to the best that we can. The methods are, we want to do stage prediction based upon the rainfall, soil moisture, and initial preconditions. So there's different approaches. That there's H&H modeling that would, run faster, or maybe be coarser resolution, but that can turn around and run a flood scenario with an rainfall input quickly. And there's also these machine learning options where you feed it a plethora of historic information, and then see if it can come up with a prediction. So I see I'm running close to time, but just to give a brief overview, our use with the National Water Model, our previous familiarity was monitoring the flow anomaly products at the EOC for tropical storms, and monitoring lake conditions along the Catawba River, where it may have rained heavily upstream of Mecklenburg County and was making its way down the Catawba River system. So we believe there was a forecasting potential that, well, there certainly is, but we wanted to take something in-house and try to make it happen in the short term, so we could meet a strategic objective of having a forecasted flood product. And so the flow prediction is a little bit different than what we do. We are accustomed to taking stage and developing flood inundation mapping, but we figured we could take flow prediction and kind of equate that probabilistically to do the mapping that way. So I'll go ahead and stop the presentation there. So Joel had a application I kind of wanted to demo. I don't think I'm going to have time. That may be something we save for the breakout session. But he was able to take all of the data from the short range forecast of the National Water Model, save it, and then plot it out on maps, so we can compare real readings from the USGS gauges at all these different sites throughout Mecklenburg County and the state, and then just align that with the predictions at the time. So that was kind of our first initial focus, was just to see how did the predictions pan out when looking at them as they occurred, in light of what we know has happened after the fact. So I don't know if I can get through it, but this is the basic idea here. We start sometime before the rainfall occurs, and we start looking at the predictions hour by hour and seeing where things line up. And then the blue tells you where the peak actually is, and then you can see it in comparison to where the model predicted it was at different times, before the event actually occurred. Was it predicting things rather earlier? Did it just kind of take shape at the end? That sort of thing. So that was our approach, is just to kind of evaluate it on that level.
Thanks, James. Yeah, we do need to move on to our next speaker, but I'm glad you were able to share this presentation. Are you open if people have questions directly for you, if they're not able to answer them in the breakout room? And
Absolutely.
If so, would you mind putting maybe your email in the chat, and then that way if folks have more particular questions on that, we might be able to get to that.
Yeah, we'll do.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So without further ado, we're going to jump to our next speaker. Just a note too, the 2-minute warning is going to come as the chat. I know that's sometimes hard to monitor as you are screen sharing, but just I guess keep a notice for that little red mark that comes up. So next we have Bruce Rendall from the Mile High Flood District. So over to Bruce.
Thank you very much. Bruce Rendall. I'm with the Mile High Flood District. I'm the flood warning manager. And just wanted to, don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I do have a live website that maybe we can drive a little bit. The district is about 1,600 square miles, and we have about 3,500 miles of streams. What we use the National Water Model is a point on our website, which I will post the web page itself, and I cannot participate, I cannot screen share.
Well, Karen, if you could grant access.
Should be good now, Bruce.
Okay. So if we, can we see a map of the Denver metro area? Yes, looks like it.
Okay.
This location shows our service area. This, for not familiar with it, this is the Denver metro area. We have about 110 of our stream gauges that are alert stream gauges. We have 38 USGS stream gauges and about 6 river gauges from the Division of Water Resources that are all located on this map. Any circle, just like the NWPS of the National Weather Service, a circle means it's a measured stream flow, a box means a forecasted flow. So we can take those individual ones and just say we want to look at the forecasted stream flow. And these are all the locations where we are actually forecasting information. Almost all of these are from the National Water Model. So we go in there every hour or so and download all the information, which is like 150 plus locations from the National Water Model using their API, grab the flow predictions, convert them into stage at the various locations, and then have them available here on the map. Just a little bit of warning, I will tell you the National Water Model is 100% accurate today because we've got no rain. So you can click on the location. It tells you the specific information, the maximum forecast, and any one of those will then give a forecasted flow in the format of the National Water Model. Here you can see, as in the NWPS, the blue is the measured flow at the particular gauge. This is one of ours, and then the forecasted National Water Model, both for the short range forecast and the long range ensemble for 10 days. You have the ability to slide forward and backward in the graphs. So it gives us a quick information on what was available there. Great, if you bear with me. Okay. Other locations, we just use this as a, like you say, a data point for reference. I think the biggest benefit for us is a long range, a view maybe 10 days down the road for the larger basins. It's information, it's there, it's a data point. We really are utilizing it as best we can. Pluses for the National Water Model. It works very good on large basins, especially undeveloped basins where we have very little information. This is Box Elder Creek. We have Cherry Creek, which goes all the way down almost to Castle Rock. It has very good information for there, and it's useful. Where you have ultra urbanized areas, it does not do much of an impact. This is not really a good forecast from the National Water Model, even though it shows 0. It is not a good forecast because we have several large regional detention ponds that are not accounted for in the National Water Model. I don't see how that's going to change. We're just gradually moving them over to our own forecast system. Other things, somebody has mentioned that the higher resolution NHD plus would be helpful if the National Water Model migrates into that. But overall, it's data, it's information. It gives us a forecast for some locations where we do not have forecast. It is a straightforward process. Once we have computed the code to get the information, We do it. We just do a list. Here's the list of everything I want to get. Run the program 154 times. So that kind of mechanism then gets into a framework where we can easily display it on the map. We are trying to copy and mimic the NWPS program as much as we can for our locations and our information. We euphemistically have stolen the name MWPS, which is Mile High Flood District Water Prediction Service. And all this information is available to the public. I gave you a link, so if you wish to play around with this map, it is alive and on online right now from the forecasts. Again, forecasts are about updated every hour or so. And that's kind of a quick summary of what we managed to put together. It's been a frantic couple months to make this operational, but it is operational now. So with that, I will stop sharing and I'll take any questions or any future comments on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. It's really, really great work. If you do have a link to that, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat here. And then also we are going to save questions to the end. So if anybody does have any particular questions for Bruce, just note those in the chat and also just note for Bruce. That would be great. Thank you. So as we're going to speed along, our next speaker today is Zach Becker from the Missouri Hydrology Information Center. So over to you, Zach.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
There we go. I want to thank everyone for coming out to this event. I want to thank GRI for inviting us to speak and for doing this whole case study with Missouri. It's very exciting for us. So MOHIC, as what we call it locally, is the Missouri Hydrology Information Center. MOHIC is housed within the Water Resources Center of the Missouri Geological Survey, which is all underneath the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. So I have two pictures on the right here. We have a picture of our director, Drew Bunton, giving a presentation out in Augusta, Missouri for a new park we're opening up. And then down on the right, I have a picture of our team doing a visit with the Iowa Flood Center up north. I wanted to include a picture because a lot of this work is being done by a team that is only 4 of us, and we're trying to get a lot done and a lot accomplished. And part of the community of practice that has been teased out through this process with GRI and the case studies is exactly what we're trying to do, trying to develop these communities of practice, contributing to them, I should say, and trying to identify people within Missouri to try to get things to come along. So the question that I want to answer first is what happened in Missouri? Back in 2019, we had a flood of record. We had severe flooding all the way from above Omaha down to St. Louis, down the Mississippi and the Missouri Basin and the Mississippi Basin. And this flood was catastrophic. I mean, it was it's unfathomable how much water fell. I have a picture on the right of Clarksville, Missouri, and then right up above is Jefferson City. My first day on the job was actually June 3rd, 2019, and this is what I drove into work. You can see these road tops that barely eke out of the water. I basically was driving in on roads like that to get to my first day on the job. So from my entire time starting in DNR, it was all about flooding and all about how to respond to this. What happened in the 2019 flood is that we had over 279 days of flooding in various communities across the area. Just water standing in fields, water standing in neighborhoods. It was both a large impact in the amount of water, but then also just how long it stuck around. I included some information on what happened with our levee districts here in Missouri. It's a heavy levee system for the Missouri and Mississippi Basin. We had massive failures for many of our levee systems, with them overtopping or developing holes or completely blowing out. We had one levee that blew out by over 2,000 feet, completely dumping a field with sand. We have a major highway, I-29, that goes north to south over by the Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska border. It was underwater by 15 feet. So this was a massive, massive flood. So the question becomes is how do you respond to this? MOHIC came together because of the flooding in 2019. The Governor Parson put together what was called the FROG, the Flood Recovery Advisory Working Group. And the FROG came together trying to understand how Missouri can be more resilient. Not only how can we recover, but how can we plan and prepare ourselves for the future? And through the frog, the idea of a water center came together. And in that water center, these goals that I have on my screen came to be the initiatives that we are taking on. So we're trying to expand our surface water monitoring by installing discharge and stage stream gauges across the state to complement the USGS gauges. We're trying to expand soil moisture monitoring and mapping by adding in more sensors on currently installed infrastructure across the state by creating a network of networks and then taking that data to make soil moisture maps. We're trying to deliver a flood model to the state, meaning a model that is able to predict and show the inundation for what is to come and what is actually occurring. We're doing some water supply mapping up in Northeast Missouri. And the idea is for all of this data and all this information to be displayed onto a dashboard for our citizens to access. For us, we believe information is most usable when you can access it and make choices from it. So we know that all these pieces are critical, but for us, and the focus of today is that flood model. We want to have information for our citizens to know what's going on in their backyard and to make choices when flooding does occur. Because here in the state, we can have flooding and drought all at the same time, even in the same day. So that leads us to the Missouri use case of the National Water Model. For us, it is a pretty broad forecasting and flood inundation mapping. We want to leverage the National Water Model and the efforts that are going into that and the developments to use it for the state, to take the outputs and the mapping and display it for our citizens to see what's going on. We know that the National Water Model is going to be a great product, and it is a great product now. We know it's getting better. And so for us, that's what makes it useful, is that it gives us a way to collaborate with our federal partners to implement a project as large as the National Water Model and its FIM services across the state and putting that onto our dashboard. Now, one of the things that was challenging for us, that was the communication part, not as a fault of National Water Model, but who do you talk to? Who do you call? Who do you reach out to? That was one of the challenges that we had as we were beginning this process. I didn't know about the National Water Model's flood inundation mapping service until I was at a meeting a year ago out in San Diego for the Esri user conference. And I was talking to an individual from the National Water Model, and he said, "Hey, did you know that we're going to have a mapping service go live next year for Missouri?" I said, "I had no idea." And that set us on this long path of trying to understand what is the National Water Model, what is it going to provide, and what can we do to help build into it. And so that brings us to how we got here. We got here today by collaborating. We had meetings with organizations across the whole country: California, Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, I believe Maryland, Pennsylvania. We were meeting with people just to try to learn more. It was an exercise of trying to create our own opportunities to learn and to help build this community of practice here in the state. Once we made those connections, it helped us learn more questions. What questions do you ask? What information do we need? And through that, we were able to put together some working groups, some people that we go to when we're trying to learn more about what's best for the state. So for the National Water Model in Missouri, we recommend collaboration. Collaboration is how we got here. It's how we learned about what flood modeling is. It's how we learned about what the National Water Model can do. It helped us think about the processes we have to learn and how we bring people into this problem we're trying to solve. So we've been meeting with local universities, state and local organizations. We're trying to find opportunities to collaborate with our federal partners. And it's all because of the National Water Model. For us, we saw an opportunity. We wanted to take it. And on this journey of implementing this across the state, we had to find people, talk with them, learn from them, be willing to be humbled in our understanding because we're a small team. And that's kind of how we got here today. We were only able to have this opportunity of presenting here for you guys today because of collaboration and trying to network. So that's all that I have. Is we're trying to deploy the National Water Model across the state for flood inundation mapping as a statewide product. And it's one of the small pieces that we have for MOHIC.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I've been really enjoying hearing all of these presentations back to back. So we have two more that we're going to get to, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions. And if not, we'll be able to address those in the breakout room. So up next, we have Stacy Stark from Spatial at the University of Minnesota. So over to you, Stacy.
Hi there. I will need the ability to share also.
you could try again. I think we just granted you access.
Okay. There we go. Great. Hi, everyone. This has been so interesting. Let me just get this. There we go. Hi, Stacy Stark. I'm at the University of Minnesota. I work in our Duluth office. We have a unit called USpatial, which is a geospatial support and research collaboration organization in the Research and Innovation Office. And we do system-wide support for all the campuses and any discipline. So I work with pharmacists, I work with folks in the medical school, and I work with biologists. We have a lot of work with our state agencies, and one program is in hazard mitigation planning. I've been working in this hazard mitigation planning initiative for about a decade, a little over a decade, actually. And in that work is where I focused the information around the national water model. However, I see a lot of potential across the university for people who would be interested. We had to focus on one, or actually we focused on a couple of different uses, and I'll explain that in a minute. The hazard mitigation planning program that we have at the University of Minnesota supports almost all of the state of Minnesota counties, and we also do a statewide plan. About 2 years ago, we started delivering these plans in an interactive web format so that we can bring this tool of hazard mitigation planning, which has largely been within counties and with emergency managers and jurisdiction representatives, to the residents of the county to try to communicate what the jurisdictions are doing and also some of the risks and vulnerabilities of each jurisdiction and how those are being addressed through hazard mitigation planning. So we have an online dashboard, well, an online website, an ArcGIS online hub that we use to build out components of the hazard mitigation plan. So we have a page for each hazard profile, and this is a couple of snapshots of what we deliver in terms of our flood risk and vulnerability page. So we have a description of what flooding is, how we define it in terms of the FEMA hazard mitigation planning process. We have a dashboard that shows the history of flooding in each jurisdiction, how frequently it happens, and a link back to the NCEI database of events. We have descriptional information that highlights some of the major events in the county. So major disasters often include flooding in Minnesota. Flooding is the #1 natural hazard in Minnesota. We spend a lot of money on it every year. And we want people who participate in hazard mitigation planning or just learning about it, we want them to take it seriously. So we pull out some historical events to talk about. And then finally, we have a dashboard that is showing the potential economic loss. This was shown with one of our previous presenters, the second one, where you can use models to show actual building damage and loss to structures in the way of an inundation area. And this is where I thought, well, gosh, could we use the National Water Model for some of this in the areas that we have gaps in our data? So although Minnesota has a lot of flooding, in hazard mitigation planning, we use the FEMA mapped inundation areas, or the DFIRMs, to do this analysis to show the risk to flooding at a 1% annual chance flood. The areas in pink are all areas that don't have any official mapping. They don't have regulatory mapping, but they also don't have any other kind of mapping that would be valid for using it in this purpose. What I was wondering about, and I've looked at a few different models, could we create flood inundation maps for those areas where we don't have good information? Unfortunately, a lot of these areas are also the same areas we don't have areas to they don't have gauges as well. And someone mentioned all the tiling in Northwest Minnesota. There's a lot of agricultural tiling, so that's really a problem too. The other thing is, could we maybe tell at least a story of historical flooding? We teamed up with MnDOT with this project. We talked about using this model for flood forecasting as well, and using our hazard mitigation audience, which is a largely emergency managers, to identify forecast flooding as well. And we spent a lot of time just collaborating, communicating. That was just a great side effect of this project, to work with them. What we ended up doing was asking for support to access the retrospective stream flow estimates in order to generate some historical flood inundation maps, and potentially a predictive map of, say, a 1% annual chance flood. We worked with some really talented team members to be able to reproduce the code and generate results. The code wasn't actually the obstacle, which was great. We were able to figure that out. But when we went back with our MnDOT partners, what we found out is that we were getting these areas of inundation that we didn't actually have any way to validate, because they weren't gauged areas. And we realized we're making a lot of assumptions about the data. We're using different data inputs than we use in our other with our other modeling. And so we thought that we needed to consider that validation. Again, I just want to mention that just the process of working with MnDOT and identifying what their needs were in emergency management really helped to improve our hazard mitigation planning as well. So our lessons, we were able to produce an output from retrospective data for these areas that were not mapped, but because we didn't have a lot of a way to validate that, we couldn't we couldn't use it in hazard mitigation planning for FEMA or for MnDOT flow modeling. And I see I'm out of time here, so I'm just going to stop here. I do have some information here if you're interested in looking at our hazard mitigation planning program, or contacting me to ask more about this information. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Stacy. And again, if there are any questions for Stacy, feel free to put those in the chat, and we can also follow up in the breakout rooms as well. And then our last but definitely not least speaker is Margaret Minzer from the OKI Regional Council of Governments. So Margaret, if you're online, it's over to you. And Stacy, if you mind stopping sharing your screen.
All right. Can everyone see my screen and hear me?
Yes. So
okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you, everyone. We're really excited about the opportunity to work with the team here, and to kind of share what we've learned, and what we plan to do with the National Water Model in the future. So real quick, who I am, my name's Margaret Minzer. I am the Senior Green Space Planner and Environmental Planner for Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. One of the hats I wear in my organization is I work with trying to assess the environmental impacts of transportation projects that are going on in the region. So the thing about OKI is a regional council of government, as well as a metropolitan planning organization. So as a metropolitan planning organization, what we are is we definitely have a role where we are a pass-through for federal transportation dollars for the local local transportation dollars. We serve 8 counties in this greater Cincinnati region in 3 states, as you might guess from the name OKI. So, I mean, it's very challenging for us because we definitely, our region has all different types of, we are very urban, we have very rural areas, as well as operating in 3 states. So we get to learn what happens in each state, for a state, and then we have to do it again 2 more times. So, so again, the big role that for this project was, looking at our transportation projects, especially in terms of our long-range transportation plan. So we call our long-range transportation plan the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And what we, one of the things that's really important with this plan is this is basically like our blueprint of where the projects will be for the next 2050, and for the planning horizon of 2050. So every 4 years, we update our plan and we add new projects or remove new projects, and we do an assessment of what those impacts will be. We just, our plan was just, our plan.
Ignore that, I'm sorry.
I know, I was like, our plan was just approved last Thursday. And so our time frame is we have this long range plan, and then every year when we understand what kind of funding is available, we put a call out for projects, and local communities will come in and they will apply for funding. And as we evaluate where they stand in terms of the plan, that's kind of where we draw the red line of what we can afford to fund each year. So, just to give you an overview of this latest round of projects, we have roughly about 250 projects in the region. And you can see, one thing I would like to add is that all the projects that are in this plan and also that are applied for are submitted through the communities that are part of our region. So, OKI isn't determining what projects go in the plan. This is all community supported projects. And so these are the projects that we have. We have considerable amount of money in there. And so my goal with the project here is, my screen is frozen. There we go. How can we use National Water Model to really do a deeper dive into what those projects look like? Because in an ideal world, wouldn't it be great if we could look at those projects and really have even more information going in before the projects get built or designed, or if there's an opportunity to go in and fix something that maybe needs some attention, while you're already there and working on these projects, let's go ahead and try to address them at that point in time when they apply for the funding. So, so we're looking at our projects considered for the long range plan, and we're kind of estimating where that flooding, again, we're looking at the retrospective flow estimates and estimation of inundation for the for those areas. So what we found is, we can use these. We took a number of areas where there were proposed projects, and we found a couple of acceptable sample sites to try out, try and use the National Water Model. And we found that we can use it to help visualize scenarios for the local project areas. It does serve as a complementary approach, and helping us to get other data sources that we might not have been considering otherwise. So one of the things that we will be doing is developing our internal expertise and how to use the model in the future. We had some help with evaluation of some of the areas, and we definitely need to, we would like to rerun the model in other stream reaches and also watershed areas for the region. So just kind of expanding on what we've already done. So that in a nutshell is what we're looking at. We're looking at trying to use it for evaluation in our future transportation plans. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Margaret. So we are kind of right up against the time that we were going to go into our breakout rooms, but I just thought I would ask if there was maybe one burning question that anyone had that they wanted to address to either any speaker individually or the group of speakers as a whole. I'll also open it up to our research team and or Noah as well. You know, maybe as we
Maybe
wait for.
you just put David Valley on the spot here.
Yeah.
You know, how useful are these use cases that you've heard here, David, from the perspective of your continued efforts to refine the national water model?
It's exciting to see how different communities are trying to tackle their flood concerns and leverage this data. Speaking to the confidence issue, we're in the same boat as you are. We're still gaining confidence, learning, where are the limitations. We think we've got a pretty good handle on it. And our effort over the next 3 years with this next generation of the water model, I think, is really going to significantly improve the overall performance. There are some things to keep in mind the water model will never do. It's not designed to do the pluvial, stormwater, urban drainage type flood forecasting. It's a tool for river reach. That's its whole design. We're looking and we're leveraging our Cooperative Institute to do research now on how do we get at that for these urbanized corridors, where it's not so much a river or stream reach conveying the water, but it's pavement and it's overtopping stormwater systems. That's a whole different forecast element that the water model was never designed to handle. So you just have to keep that in mind. But I'm excited to see how communities like this are trying to leverage the information. It's comforting to see states, like North Carolina, Mecklenburg County, which has such a well-oiled machine, or Boulder, Denver area, same thing, where they have a well-constructed architecture already in place, that they're still finding ways to allow our services to complement what they've already done. And that's exactly how we envisioned it would occur, because we're going to learn from one another. It's nice to see our friends from Missouri on as well, because we're actually working on an agreement with that state in particular to have them work with us as a pathfinder to see how we can go from incorporating one-dimensional HEC-RAS models to improve our inundation services, to then look at their two-dimensional HEC-RAS models as kind of a pathfinder mission for us, so that we can get this information that some states already have or are developing themselves for other purposes than flood inundation, but actually allow their work to help inform the national solution. And those are the types of relationships that I think are going to be really, really precious to help us build, consider what we're doing. We're trying to deliver real-time flood inundation services at a national scale. Oh boy, there are a lot of challenges with that. So I'm excited by this, and I applaud the work that's already been done. And and then there's the historical archive retrospective access. We saw some comments in the chat about that. To me, that's a really rich data set just with the current construct of the national water model the way it is. But that provides information that we've never had before, outside the 8,000 or 9,000 stream gauges that we have, where you can actually go back and use the retrospective run to tease out certain signals on some of these watersheds. That's exciting. I think an exciting capability as we look forward. I'm just excited by all of this. I appreciate the tremendous effort that's been put in across the community here at large, just to try to jump in and leverage some of the services we're already providing.
Well, thanks so much for that, David. And Christian, I think the fun part will begin here now, hopefully.
Yeah. So we have opened up 3 breakout rooms. I believe everyone has been pre-assigned. If for some reason you are missing a breakout room, Kieran Hederman will be our point person for navigating you into the right space. We're going to have these breakout rooms open until approximately 2:20, and we have 3 of our colleagues who will be moderating each of these. This will be Larissa, Elizabeth, and Robin. So you'll see one of them in your room, and they will help guide us through a discussion. We'll have 2 of our use case speakers in those rooms as well. So that should be an opportunity to learn more about their specific use cases and answer anything. Once we come back, we'll get a little bit of a report out. So whichever rooms you weren't in, you'll get to hear about what that discussion was. Then we're going to spend the rest of our time sharing some resources that we've created, specifically where these use cases now live, and then a few concluding remarks. So without further ado, Kieran, if you wouldn't mind opening up our breakout rooms.
I know maybe some of that was a little abrupt to what we just had. I know Robin was just wrapping up some comments here. I was jumping around the rooms and it looked like, we had some great conversations with each of these groups here. But I know also we're kind of pushing the envelope on people's time and attention. There's a lot coming at you here. So we're going to move to our, at this point, we're going to hopefully do a little bit of report out what each one has, and then talk about next steps and the resources we have available. Christian, are we over to you?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm just going to kick it right over to our use case lead. So we're going to have Robin, Larissa, and Elizabeth each just give a brief recap of what happened in their room for the folks that weren't able to attend, and then we'll go and share some of these resources. So yeah, I guess we'll start with Robin, and then we'll kick it around from there.
Sure. So our group really spent the bulk of the time kind of in two areas. One was talking about with some of the communities who have not yet engaged with the National Water Model about what kinds of capabilities and needs they have in terms of dealing with flooding, that they're curious about whether the National Water Model and how the National Water Model might be able to be used by them to help solve some of those problems. And then we talked about this idea of the communities of practice and how useful that has been at a number of levels to help make the National Water Model useful to local problems. So we talked about it in terms of national level efforts that NOAA is trying to shepherd and nurture and feed, and how they're doing that. Talked about how local states and communities can use their own existing communication networks to reach out to people. Got some tips from various folks about, where to look and how to connect on things. And of course, our NOAA folks, David and Brenna, were really very gracious to continue their education of all of us about what the water model can do and how to take advantage of it. So it was I thought a really rich conversation, and one that made you wish we had time to get together more often as local communities and talk about these things. And I guess I should say to my group, if I left out something you think is really critical, jump in and correct me.
Or jump into the chat as well. I still see there's a great conversation going on there. Thank you, Robin. Over to Larissa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kristen. Our conversation was also very fruitful, and I think we talked about basically the same things, but on top of that, the issue of trust with the model, and it came up as it did when we were discussing these use cases with our communities, and how do we validate this data? How do we show this data? How do we access it? And how communities that might not have the capacity, the technical capability, can access this and use this information for planning. And another topic that emerged in our conversation is how we are, NOAA as a national institute is connecting with other national efforts that are trying to map flooding, and how are they building this conversation, and how this gets to local people that are using the flood maps or the data to feed their own decision making. So which data do we trust? How do we connect all of that? And what I think the last thing, and please help me if I am missing something, is even if they are interested in using it, the how is a little challenging. So collaboration emerged as something that is completely necessary in order for the National Water Model to be adopted. So learning from other communities, connecting with this bunch of institutes, people here in this city that are so knowledgeable, and trying to build awareness of how this model can help. I'm sorry about the background noise, but there is construction around. So just how to build capacity so they can benefit from this wealth of data.
That's great, Larissa. Summary. I mean, it's a point that I was hearing sort of run through today. which is, a lot, of course, the effort has gone into the kind of the technical side of how we actually get the model to work in the ways that, as good scientists, we like it to work. And the other sort of key element here, though, is how do we get people to actually use it? And what are the processes in place and what's the approach to doing that? And this, I think, is one of the earliest side here. We gotta, learn from each other and then figure out how we develop ideally models for collaboration. And it's not gonna be a one size fits all right across this country as vast as ours. But I think there are clearly some lessons that are drawn from from many of you about how you've done that collaboration that we want to capture, as well as the what you do. It's the how you've gone about doing it. And that's probably what we have to really bottle if we're going to scale this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you,
really,
Steve.
yeah, really great insights. And then last but not least, Elizabeth, what was discussed in your room?
Yeah, thanks so much. And our discussion was so fruitful that I missed the notification that we were closing the breakout room. So I apologize to my group. I was in the middle of phrasing the next question, and all of a sudden we were back here. So for my group, if I miss anything, or if you want to share insights to what I was finalizing asking, please do so in the chat. And start off by thanking, Kristen, Steve, everyone from NOAA, and every folks involved, all the folks involved with the use cases. I think it's been a really, really rich and rewarding experience just to sort of learn more and keep this process going. I will try not to reiterate what everyone else has said, but I think, one of the critical themes from our conversation is exactly what Steve was just saying there. Understanding how this can fit for your community. It's not a one size fits all. And a couple of folks in our discussion really said that quite nicely. But, if you're in a community that doesn't have as many USGS gauges, or if you're in a community that doesn't have, a big firm to partner with to do machine learning, then don't try to use this one size fits all. So I think for us, it was really understanding how to make this work for your community. And there is a use for every community, but really understanding how you can tailor it to your different community needs. The other thing that really came out of our discussion was the benefit of collaboration. And we had a couple folks noting that, maybe they are in the field and they weren't aware of what tools and resources, or they're in a geographic location and they don't know who else is doing work in this space. So, things like going out to conferences, conferences like this are really critical just to sort of know what's available. And of course, the first step is really knowing what's available to you and what resources, you can access. And also, we have this narrative of really trying to listen and learn from others, which really inspired me for the work that we're doing on these use cases, because the whole point is to take something that could be really technical, really complicated, really scary, and make it accessible. And that was another big theme for us. Something else, along those lines is simplifying the tools, and hopefully in the future, there can be some way to simplify the tools so that a starting point becomes more accessible. And I think that was a really key ending point of our conversation, is that if there's an access point, and changing the access point for each community and making it, for meeting the community needs with that access point is something that we really talked about. And I think I want to end with saying what others have said, but I think it's really important, is that we have to acknowledge that there are uncertainties, and those are okay. And for somebody like me who loves statistics and modeling, that's sometimes difficult, but accepting those uncertainties, acknowledging them, and then just remembering that this is a useful data point to complement and supplement what you're already doing, that can be a really big way to unlock the utility of the National Water Model. So I will stop there. But of course, for those of you who are in my breakout room, if I missed something or spoke out of turn, please do let me know and throw things in the chat. But thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Excellent. We do have 5 minutes left. I just maybe wanted to put one of the speakers from my group on the spot a little bit. So there seemed to be a theme across all of the different breakout rooms about how to connect with folks and collaboration. Brenna Sweetman actually leads a brand new NOAA community of practice. So Brenna, I didn't know if you could just take a minute to maybe share the link in the chat about, I know you have a specific coastal inundation community of practice, but I know there are a few other NOAA ones as well. So I just was curious if you could just chat on that briefly.
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. And hi, everyone. I'm Brenna Sweetman, a social scientist with NOAA's National Ocean Service. I've been involved with the National Water Model for a few years, and a lot of these conversations centered around engagement and how to ensure that our tools, data, and services are actually meeting needs, ties to a new effort, the Coastal Inundation Community of Practice. And so when we're thinking about flooding, kind of what I've been focusing on with other collaborators and partners is looking in the coastal space specifically. And, you know, much of what everyone kind of talked about in the breakout groups is exactly what we're striving for. So how do we better coordinate and collaborate across different levels of government, thinking about these national level tools and resources available, such as the National Water Model? How do we really ensure that these are helping meet needs and applicable to those addressing flooding on the ground? And so this is sort of similar in that it's a coastal inundation community of practice, but we are working with kind of more boundary spanner organizations. So those are who are kind of working to translate some of the science and get it into the hands of decision makers on the ground. So we're working with the American Society of Adaptation Professionals and the National Sea Grant Office to really kind of help build this collaboration. You know, we are working towards kind of a network of networks. So this is a national community of practice. But as is the nature of communities of practice, we want this to be driven by needs and interests of people who are actually looking for flooding resources and how to effectively use those. So if you are in a coastal community and interested in chatting more, learning about this, let me know. We are hoping that it's a way to kind of help support existing resilience networks as well, because we know that there are a lot of different kind of national communities out there right now, and a lot of different resources. So you know, sharing in case this is something that might be helpful to you and your programs in the future. But kind of across NOAA, we're all really striving for this new approach to engagement, and happy to chat with anyone who is interested in talking more deeply about flooding challenges.
Excellent. Thank you, Brenna. And just a brief shout out to Brenna. Brenna was helping with the original brainchild of this entire project way back when. So very, very near and dear to this project. So with that, to keep us on schedule, we are now going to share some resources. So I know we've done a lot of talking, but all of this material that we have shared about does live somewhere. So let me just make this full screen. We have created a website that houses each of these use cases, which is not just something that we did. We've also written them up. They look quite pretty. So I'm just going to leave this up for a second, then I will actually show you what the website looks like. So you can either use the QR code with your phone, this tiny URL link. I believe my collaborators are putting a link in the chat now, or you can ignore all of this and we will send out a post-event email with the recording and all of these materials that we have shared. But briefly, our website lives on the Global Resilience Institute site. So here, as we mentioned, this is part of a 3-phase study. So our landing page has a whole suite of different links to our collaborators and NOAA's different various websites. We mentioned that this is a 3-phase study. So phase 1, when I mentioned we did all of those interviews, this is a summary of what we found. It's written up as a research paper. There's just the recommendations that we created from all of this as a nice little report, so you can kind of get whatever level of information you might be interested in. And then phase 2, which is probably what you are mostly interested in, this is the site where right now this is a link to the registration. This is where our Zoom recording from today's session will live. And then also this is where you will find the write-up for each of the 6 use cases. So if you click on any of them, they are written up as a nice PDF, which is with a lot more information than we were able to share today. And then this is part of a 3-phase study. So we anticipate beginning the 3rd phase of this study in August. So right now this is empty, but once we do start having information, this is where it will live. And phase 3 of the study is really looking at how tools like the National Water Model can help increase community capacity to engage in resilience-related planning and decision-making. So we'll have a link to this. And then additionally, we also have, these are QR codes, and again, these will be shared in this post-event email, but the codes that we shared as part of the Minnesota and the OKI use cases, they're Jupyter notebooks that our colleagues from CUAHSI, Tony and Irene put together for us. Those are publicly available right now, so you can either go and run them as is, or I think they should be able to go and figure out how to make these work for your own communities as well. So you can either use the QR codes here or the tiny URLs, or again, ignore it and we'll send you the actual links in an email in a few days. And then we're gonna just end with a couple of suggested next steps, but I'm gonna kick it over to my colleague Steve to send us home here.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Christian, and thanks everybody. I mean, we're here at 2.5 hours in, and so I'm delighted that so many of you are still with us here. again, the key here is for this community, hopefully, to live beyond this here, and certainly the information that you help to provide us living on as well. We're just really helping to try, aspiring to be helpful to our NOAA sponsors. And so one of our first recommendation for the next step, if you have not, is to spend more time basically exploring the NWPS website, which you can find at waternoaa.gov. Just playing around with it will really help to orient it, what kinds of capabilities are there. We also want to encourage you to dive into some of the informational materials that NOAA has in our own project website. Take a look at each of the use cases that have been written up, and hopefully that it provides something you can also share with others to say, hey, this is what we should be trying to do here. Or this is another possible path that we might be able to pursue. So we would welcome your sharing the recording of the event and spread it amongst others. Again, hopefully recruit others into this community. And we want to also support connecting the folks who have done the 6 use case studies, who all have indicated a willingness to share with others, what they've done, what their experience has done. So we welcome your sort of following up and connecting with them. And we also have, and maybe we could show this quick thing here. There is a way to kind of continue the conversation and stay engaged. Can we go to the link here? There we go. So you'll see here is just a very simple questionnaire that we ask that that you can follow up as a way to get a bit more information. Christian, anything else you want to add about this?
Yeah, this is simply just our collaborators at NOAA are just very busy. So this is hopefully our way to kind of create a easier traffic flow to get all of your questions answered. Yeah, your name and email is simply so we know who to follow up with when you have a particular question. Otherwise, there's a whole suite of information available, like all of Steve and myself and all of our research team, those emails available are on our website as well. So feel free to contact those directly. And again, with that email that we will be sending out, each of our speakers that have offered to be contacted directly will provide those as a summary as well. So we're just trying to provide as many different avenues to get information to you as we can.
Great. So yeah, so we're happy to play kind of the air traffic controller here and help that along. So please use us as that research as a resource. And now I guess we're just moving towards concluding here. One thing that I think we really have demonstrated in just the last 2.5 hours is kind of both the value and the challenges of how we actually build more resilient communities. At the Global Resilience Institute, we basically approach this through basically talking about 5 barriers that we have to overcome. It's very difficult to advance resilience if you have a first barrier, risk illiteracy. If you don't think anything's going to happen, then you're not likely to do much about preparing for it and trying to get out in front of it here. And one of the real power of so much of the initiatives that are already underway, that the National Water Model is clearly a tool to help, is just raising people's awareness that they may be in harm's way and that there's things that they could be doing and should be doing ideally to get out in front of that risk. So it's far less destructive for them and catastrophic. The second barrier is we don't design for resilience. We often design for efficiencies. We in that process here, we often fail when we're constructing things to think about the what ifs and kind of take care of that. We've seen in many cases that the model here being applied for things like transportation planning and regional planning and so forth can be invaluable, because if we can bake in resilience, so we can bake in the mitigation measures and even for ability for things to fail gracefully, to accelerate recovery, which has a lot of planning around emergency management, we'll get to a much, much better place. The third barrier, which is a really tough nut to crack, is there are often not the economic incentives to adopt resilience best practices. And this is either from a lack of public policy goals or other goals. We know basically these lacks of incentives are a real barrier. Insurance can play a helpful nod. As we know, insurance is becoming more costly for many communities and maybe not even be much of an option. And as we basically build more resilience, we're going to be able to ideally be, in a more affordable way for dealing with risk. Our fourth barrier we also touched on is governance. basically we're not organized for this very well. We have political jurisdictions that aren't aligned with the way geography and risk works. And our last barrier is training and education. We really just got to get more broadly this thinking, this mindset, this systems approach, the collaboration is much more spread across the way in which we address these issues. You know, we're really operating still very much with a 19th century like division of labor, specialization, and somehow the sum of the parts will get us to a whole. And that Max Weber type approach really is not getting us far for dealing with this challenge. At the end of the day, we really have to, and with some urgency, scale our ability to manage the risks that are coming at us. We're so appreciative that there are some great tools out there for this, but turning it into something that is being practiced practiced as a part of routine way in which we kind of manage our lives is organic to how we live. This is the big challenge that we have going forward, and I'm confident this group is well. Happily, we're inspired by what a lot is being done, and there's certainly more work to be done. As we think about the next phase, what we're thinking most about is how, in terms of scaling, especially for communities that are underserved, that really don't have the technical know-how and the rest, is how we work with intermediaries, basically boundary organizations, whether those are governmental ones like regional planning groups, or whether they're nonprofits or others who can kind of herd cats better. But we're really trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually move some of this capability in a way that can get down and really be embraced by communities. Organizations like, we had a couple of representatives here today, the Puerto Rico Science and Research Trust. This is an organization that's, is really helping small communities across Puerto Rico with some of the technical challenges that they just really don't have the capacity at the local level, local government level to deal with. The kind of work that Todd has been doing in Vermont that's so important for helping communities to get out in front. So that's something we really want to tackle. So I just want to conclude now with a thanks to the team, most importantly for our NOAA collaborators, of which this would not all be possible. Really appreciate David Valley and his enthusiasm across the way and all this. Brian Cosgrove, who gave us a very good start on grounding on this, and with Cecilia Batterby, which we've heard from, as well as Emily Krisky. Thanks so much for all you're doing, and for my GRI and CUAHSI collaborators, thank you as well. And for all of you who joined this call today, we so appreciate it. Last word to you, Christian.
Thank you. I don't know if I could wrap it up any better than that. Just thank you all for sticking with us. We know 3 hours is a lot. It's a long time. Yeah, we're putting the link here again to that website. The link is also in the chat. Please be on the lookout for that email that we're going to send in a few days, which will have the recording from this talk, all of the resources that we shared, etc. Please feel free to also share that far and wide. We are very excited to be starting the 3rd phase of this study. So if you want to know more at any time, or we're looking for ways to get engaged, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, well, I think we do want to give a last word to our sponsor, David Valley. Anything that you might want to add further around next steps and or just final thoughts?
No, just I want to say thank you to everybody who's been so proactive and involved with this from the get-go, from the research team to all of these communities that have joined to be part of this. It's invaluable to us. I can't emphasize that enough. When we're developing these kind of services, having the ability to come at the communities with what we have, share, pick your brain, look at your use cases. These are the things that are invaluable to us and will help inform our development as we move forward. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, with that, we'll give you folks a few more minutes back to your afternoon, I think. Appreciate again, or late morning, I guess, for some folks that may be in the West Coast. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.